Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
Read the best, and hope for the best.
Vekoma broke well on the outside, and
But you don't expect to get speed like this.
inside. Vekoma continues to battle on down the rail. It is Vekoma who's going to win the Met Mile.
I think it's something a lot of players do, and I think it's a mistake.
Well, I think you just said it because, you can't apply one rule to everything, and you will use them sometimes, but you are trying not to. I think that's the best strategy. The Brad Cox horse we haven't mentioned, who I actually really like, Mo Strike is his name.
Watch Saratoga today on Past the Wire TV with Dawn Lupel and Jonathan Stetton. Every Saturday morning of the meet, horses to play and to play against, vulnerable favorites, track trends, winning angles, the scope, and more. Watch, subscribe, ride with us. Nobody does it better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Past the Wire TV. I'm fortunate enough to have with me today Carlos Martin, a trainer on the Naira circuit, but more importantly, someone who comes from a racing family that's probably not only racing royalty, but one of the most influential families in New York racing and in racing in general. So, Carlos, first off, thank you so much for coming on the show. Pleasure to talk horses with you.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
All right. One of the things I remember growing up and seeing you around the track when your grandfather was still with us, Frank Pancho Martin, and your dad, Jose Martin, another fantastic trainer, was still with us. And I remember as a kid, I was already a student of the game, very young. And when you were running around the racetrack, what struck me about you was, even as a young kid, I think you were a couple of years younger than me, but you were already then a student of the game and so knowledgeable about not only, your grandfather's horses and your dad's horses, but, historic horses as well. Like he could talk to you about, horses that had run 20 years before that. And I thought like I was the only kid who knew about that stuff, and you knew more than me, so you remember those old days, I'm sure, correct?
I remember the first time I was at a racetrack. That will definitely be a memory I'll always have. In 1977, with Dan Bud, the Coaching Club American Oaks, with a great filly he had for Randolph Weinster named Lakeville Miss. That was my first and earliest memory. And then after that, I kind of became interested in other people's horses and a big fan of the sport, and went from there.
Yeah, no, I remember Lakeville Miss, and Wayward Lass was also your dad, I think, correct? Right?
Yes. He trained her for Mr. Liza for Flying Z Stable, and she was a champion filly of 1981. She got the Grade 1 Mother Goose, beating the Great Heavenly Cause. Got put up by DQ in the Coaching Club American Oaks. And then later in the year, she won an important handicap race where she beat 3 or 4 other Grade 1 fillies, and a little bit of a showdown that wasn't as publicized at Belmont later in the fall to seal the deal and win the Eclipse Award.
And, everybody watching the show, who watches this show, is going to see when I said this gentleman was a racing historian. You could see that already in the first 2 minutes. I think Cash Asmussen, Steve's brother, used to ride her a lot too, if I remember correct.
You're 100% right. Yeah, Cash had a lot of success with my father. Cash rode a lot of the Flying Z horses back in those early years in the 80s and late 70s and 80s. And Cash rode Wayward Lass when she won the Mother Goose and won some important races definitely for the team.
Right. No, I remember that. And before we move on to you and your grandfather, one race that sticks out to me is, and you remember when the Marlboro Cup, which they don't even talk about today, was kind of like the Breeders' Cup Classic back then. I mean, it was the race. They created it to be the championship race. Your dad win it unexpectedly with a horse named Noble Nashua. With Ruben Hernandez, if memory serves correct, made that early move to the lead, and they just never got him. You remember that race? Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for your dad to win that race? Because back then, that was like, I don't want to use the Derby as an example. I think the Classic is a better parallel for what the Marlboro Cup was.
Yeah, no, that was an exciting day for the family, no doubt. My dad had always thought that a horse had special talent, and he was always a little starstruck. He won the Jerome in 133. He won the Swaps. He was a great horse. Didn't like the track at Saratoga in the mud, was fourth against Pleasant Colony in the Travers. And then my dad just went to work on him and kept him as good as he could keep him, and he thought he still had a chance to do something special with the horse. He ran him at the Meadowlands as a heavy favorite in one of those big 3-year-old races, and the horse just never picked up his feet. He was like 2-5. He got beat 15, 20 lengths, just never handled the track, just never got out of a canter. And I remember as a kid, everybody thought my dad was crazy for putting Noble Nashua in the Marlboro Cup after that, a bad race. It was just such an unexpectedly terrible performance for such a brilliant horse. And my father, was always true to his instincts. And he said, you know what? This horse is training great. I'm going to run him in the Marlboro Cup. I know it's a tall order. Back then, that race that day had a star-studded field. You had Fabiano. You had the mother of Easy Goer Relaxing. You had the Giant Killers Brooklyn winner Hecazado. You had the Sonny Hines great horse Amber Pass. You had the Belmont Stakes winner Temperance Hill, the Derby winner Pleasant Colony. And it goes on and on and on and on. It was a fantastic field of horses, and watching Ruben Hernandez put that horse on the lead, being a son of Nashua, vaguely noble. He got faster as the race went on, and once he went 3/4 in 11-4. For Noble Nashua, it was not a big deal to finish that mile and a quarter in under 2:01, 2 minutes and 3/5. He flew home, and he really ran. I don't think many horses would have beaten Noble Nashua that day in that race the way he ran. He was sensational.
He really was, and I remember watching it and being impressed and knowing that he was going to be dangerous when he made the lead like that. One of your dad's probably greatest accomplishments was taking Groovy, who was kind of like an also-ran in distance races, taking over his training and turning him into one of the fastest sprinters ever. I mean, Groovy ran some races that even today anybody would have a hard time beating him. Can you talk a little about what went into that, and if you were privy to any of your dad's thinking or thought process of, hey, I'm going to take this horse that running in these long races and going to make him an unbeatable sprinter?
Well, he was that kind of guy. He was very confident, and he knew the horse had brilliant ability. And he said to me, I'm going to make this horse a champion. And everybody around us was snickering after the horse got eased and was a laughing stock in the Derby. And he said, I'm going to make him a champion sprinter. And he got the horse. The horse was a little bit knocked out. He freshened the horse up. He got the horse training well. And he ran him in a race called the Firecracker. He beat a very good horse from Angel Pennant called Royal Pennant. And then the horse was pretty much on his way. Then he took a big leap of faith and ran a 3-year-old against the best sprinter in the country at that time, undefeated Phone Trick from Richard Mandela, a sensational horse that came in from California. And Dad said, we're going to go wire to wire and beat Phone Trick. And he put him on the lead. He won the Tom Fool. And just a great horse, great horseman. And he was able to be allowed to work with the horse the way he wanted to. The owners, a little bit of controversy, different trainer changes, but he had success right away. So they didn't mess with my father too much. After winning that race, he won the Forgo, beating a champion older horse in Turkoman, trained by the late, great Gary Jones, son of Ali Dar, who was one of the best older horses in the country at that time. And I remember it like yesterday because we were very close. He said to me, we're going to beat Turkoman. We're going to give the instructions, and we're going to make sure that's the only way we can beat him. I go, what do you mean? He goes, Turkoman comes flying. I've been studying his races. He comes 7-8 wide, and he's such a big horse that he just goes by everybody like a freight train. And he told Santos, I think it was Santos that rode him that day. He said to him, when you come to the top of the stretch, drift out 2, 3, 4, 5 past. Don't worry about it. I'll take the responsibility if you get beat. So everybody's looking at him. What do you mean? You're 3 in front with Groovy on the rail. You want to come off the rail? Come off the inside. They spin off the turn, 44 and change. Groovy's in front by 3, 4, 5 lengths. And here comes Turkoman. They get to the 8th pole, and Groovy's going to the middle of the track. It looks like they're both going to get a hot dog in the grandstand. And Turkoman came flying. And just at that particular moment in time, he saw the Groovy shadow out in the middle of the track, and he hesitated for a split second. And Groovy held sway 7/8 and beat him by about 3/4 of a length. But I really believe those little attention to details that my father was so good at. Analyzing the competition that day proved to make him win the Grade 1 Fargo with Groovy, because if he would have stayed on the fence, Turkman would have made his run and he would have blown right by him. But that little details I really admired about him. He was really good with stuff like that. Making a game plan.
I think we both know where he started that learning process to that attention to detail. That probably started with your grandfather, Frank. Because, you know, he was known for that. He was a legend. You know, I remember growing up, your grandfather really was almost like the king of New York racing for a long time. When he had the Sigmund and ultimately Viola summer horses, he had horses all throughout the card. He knew every one of them like the back of his hand. And he was just a dominant leading trainer from meet to meet to meet. And one of the things I think that he never got enough credit for is he was great at claiming. I mean, he played the claiming game as good as anybody, but he would claim horses and win stakes, and he would buy horses privately that, you know, the connections didn't want or were willing to sell. And back then the game was very different. People really bred to race as opposed to nowadays when there's a lot of breeding to sell. So it was a little bit more difficult back then, at least in my opinion, as a watcher of the sport and a student of the sport, to buy horses. You know, they were kind of considered almost cast-offs, you know, if they were willing to sell them. And he would buy them and win stakes with them, even from like the Phipps and, you know, barns like that. And I always used to joke, you know, the Phipps had horses that, you know, money couldn't buy because they just weren't for sale. Didn't matter how much money you had or what kind of check you brought to the barn. Those, you know, those are the best horses money couldn't buy.
Mm-hmm.
He would buy the cast-offs they were willing to sell, win stakes with them, with that attention to detail, you know?
No question. Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on with
people stopped wanting to sell him horses because he kept doing that so often. And even Alan Jerkins and him were friendly. And Jerkins, the chief, had sold him a couple of horses he did real good with. And I think one time my grandfather found out he was selling some other horses, but he didn't let him know about it. And he was selling them to other people. And my grandfather gave him a few choice words, even though they were best of friends for years. My grandfather was a competitor, and he did do that. And people were afraid of selling him a horse because he had to touch.
Right. Yeah, no, it would make them look bad. And I think a lot of that goes towards, you know, the attention to detail. Now, one thing, and today's a good day to mention it. And please, I mean, no disparage whatsoever to Rick Violette, who did a tremendous amount for thoroughbred racing. We've got a stake race named for him today at Saratoga. I'm a head scratcher when it comes to why is there no race named for Frank Martin? And I'm going to ask you this way, because I'm going to say it like it was me, okay? You are somebody who NYRA respects, and you know, you're a big part of their year-round racing program, okay? They obviously know your lineage and your involvement, your family's involvement to the sport. And taking it a step further, you know, your grandfather was responsible for bringing a lot of people into this country that went on to just really shape racing. I mean, from the Barreras to others, you know, do you ever walk into David O'Rourke's office and say, Dave, not for nothing, why we don't have a race name for my grandfather? What's up?
It's funny, you know, I was not kidding around. It's not a joking matter, but I was talking to my main client, Mark Hudd, who's the new chairman of NYRA, about that. And he said, yeah, I mean, it makes sense to him. I mean, the guy was to be 10 straight years leading trainer in New York. You know, Woody Stevens, a legend, Alan Jerkins, a legend. Like you said, they're all icons of the sport. But Frank Martin, I think, definitely, you know, belongs in that conversation to be 10 straight years leading trainer in New York and Hall of Fame trainer, and all the races he's won and all he accomplished. I think he deserves a race, and I think I should bring it up. There's no question that's been on my mind for a while, and I haven't addressed it probably as judiciously as I should have.
Well, if you need help lobbying for that, I'm all for it, because he does. I mean, there's nobody that's deserving. I mean, they run a race the other day to Pennine Ridge. How does the Pennine, you know, I know, and again, no knock on Pennine Ridge, but how do we have a race named for Pennine Ridge? We don't have one named for Frank Martin. It just makes no sense. You know, it makes no sense. Whoever's making that decision needs to rethink it. How old were you okay, and I'm going to guess it was young, when you knew what you were going to do with your life and that you were going to be a trainer and that you were going to follow in the footsteps of your grandfather and your father and become a successful trainer with stakes caliber horses. A few years ago, I saw you in the Breeders' Cup. Didn't get the win, but you were there, and you know, I'm sure there's a good shot there's a Breeders' Cup with your name on it going forward. So when did you know that this is what I'm going to do? No question about it.
I think the race with Dad with 77 with Coaching Club American Oats, you know, it was just such an ambiance and just enthralled by the whole thing of it, you know, the whole deal, and just being with my father. You know, we were always close, and I think that, you know, propelled that, watching his joy that day, the first day at the racetrack, and then I kind of started getting the bug and going more and more with him, and it was something that we both, you know, could relate to being together more. And I was, you know, such an idol. My father was such an idol to me. You know, so it was a natural thing for me to, he probably tried to give me the same advice his dad gave him, you know, this is a hard life. Why do you want to do this? Go to school, go to college, do something else. And he might've had that talk with me, but I know his father had it vigorously with him. He didn't listen. I don't think he kind of more was encouraging, I think, than his dad was for him. So I think that made it an easy transition. And he was always supportive of me, and, you know, just a great person and a great father, and, you know, miss him every day, you know.
I'm sure. Were you fortunate enough to be with your dad and your grandfather back then, where a lot of what you do today, you learned from them and remembered and still apply today?
Mainly from my father. I was always with my father. My grandfather, you know, he was a mythical figure. We were close, but later on in life, much more closer. You know, he was always, you know, revered, and we'd always go back after the barn when we were done, and we'd stop, and my dad and him would for hours and stuff about racing stuff, and they're close. But in a tough, he was very tough also with my father. My father and myself had a different relationship than my grandfather had with my dad, but then I was very close to my grandfather, and so we were just very competitive with each other. And they talked a lot of business and horses. And then I was always more of the aspect of the technical aspect, and my dad's philosophies of training horses, probably 90% of the time with my father. And then we'd go spend some time with my grandfather after the work was done, or on, you know, social occasions. And you learn from my grandfather just by watching him, you know, but I got pretty much all my basic knowledge as far as with young horses, and, you know, just trying to do the right thing by the horse, you know, no matter what, and sticking up for your principles and never trying to imitate anybody. I learned a lot of those lessons from my dad, watching him, you know, how he handled himself with the people and the horses and the clients. And everybody thinks you're just there in the afternoon with a suit and a tie, you're taking a picture. There's so much involvement to it, just handling the staff. We've been fortunate to have staff that's been with some of the good employees I had years ago with today. So, but there's a lot of details that it's just not getting up in the morning and telling them to breeze 5/8 or gallop 1.5 miles. It's like a puzzle every day that you're trying to solve. So it's challenging, and I enjoy the challenge. Some days are better than others. Some days you wake up the next morning after winning a big race, you can't wait to get to the barn. Some days you wake up next day after you had a terrible day or an injury or separations or losing a client. And it's just like life, you know, you have to roll with the punches, and you have to stay strong and focused. And when you love something, you know, you go after it every day.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned something, because one of the things that you know, and you probably know this, but your grandfather and your dad were always known as being very, very loyal people, and they had the same help with them for years and years and years. And you would see, you know, when your grandfather would be at the races, he would have the same group of people, core people around him. Most of them worked for him. Your dad was the same way. He wasn't quite as visible around the racetrack as your grandfather was, but when he was, he had the same people. And like, sometimes I don't go to the races that much anymore, and I live in Florida, but when I'll see you or one of your horses on TV or in a paddock, sometimes I'll see the person handling the horse. I'll think, you know, I remember seeing Carlos with that guy when we were little kids, you know what I mean? And they're still together.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we have a couple of those guys.
Yeah. And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
you know, that loyalty has gone through. Now you're the third generation, you know? So
yeah, no, it's incredible. It's something to definitely be proud of.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me ask you this. Has training today changed as far as the art of being, and I'm not saying with everybody, but with the majority. I mean, you know, your dad, your father, yourself are known as like what I would call old school horsemen that really get to know their horses, really try to learn those idiosyncrasies, those little niches that can, you know, turn a horse around or make a difference. Okay. In today's world, again, as an outsider, as a student of the game, as we're watching it, it seems to me that trainers have become more reliant on vets and just a system that, you know, the horse goes into my program, and if they make it, they make it, and if they don't, they don't. Has the art of being a true horseman and treating them with that individuality that your grandfather did, and your dad and yourself, has that somehow been lost or diluted in today's game?
Well, it's a little different because, like you said, back then, those guys had 30, 40 horses. They had a limit, and they would always help their friends when they got overloaded with horses. And now the super trainer arrived, and it's a free market system. There's nothing to say. You can't knock Coca-Cola, Todd Pletcher, Chad Brown, Lucas. You know, a lot of these people revolutionized the business, but it's different. You know, you're managing horses. You're managing a stable. You can only be at one place at one time. You know, you have up to 100, 200 horses. 250 horses. Some people, I guess I don't know exactly the names off the top of my head, but some of these trainers, the top 2 or 3 probably have 300 horses. So yeah, I mean, they're good horsemen and they're going to do very well, but it's a little different. It's a little different operation, of course, when you're running 30 or 40 horses and you're, you know, not that these guys aren't hands-on because they're very hard workers. You know, I don't think you can outwork Todd Pletcher, even if you wanted to. I mean, the guy is dedicated, he's focused, but yeah, I mean, it's a little different the way the operations were run years ago and the way people did things. And now you're right. You know, you have these big, it's like big conglomerates now, and they have a lot of horses, a lot of good clients, and they win a lot of races, and they go through the drill. They want the horse to be, yeah, it could be a horse too slow to, but from that aspect, it's changed. Yes. I would say you probably have a good point there when you're trying to get across in a lot of aspects.
Is it ever discouraging to you as more of a guy that comes from that other old school background to have to compete against these type of conglomerates that have all these horses and have that, you know, just an endless supply of expensive horse flesh coming into the barns?
I mean, I mean, sometimes, of course, you know, you look at what goes on, and everybody wants to get to that level to have all.
Oh, we lost Carlos. I'm sure we'll get him back in a minute. Okay, I think we got Carlos back. We're having some big thunderstorms in Saratoga, which is known for great racing, but not the best Wi-Fi internet connections anyway. So I think we got Carlos back, at least the audio. No, we don't.
Yeah.
All right, I think we got Carlos back. We're having thunderstorm issues at Saratoga. It happens. Carlos, let me ask you this. I was asking you before we lost you. Is it ever a disadvantage or feel like a disadvantage to have to compete against the, like you said, conglomerate type of stables that just have endless amounts of pricey horses coming into the barn and in through the door nonstop, it seems?
I mean, I'm motivated. You know, I love competing against the best, and you know, once in a blue moon when we beat these guys, it means a lot. I don't really look at it as far as being, you know, feeling jealous or anything like that. They have operations to run. I run my operation, and I'm satisfied with what I have and what I've accomplished.
I commend you for that, and I think that's the right attitude. And I think you'll win your share. You already are. What are your goals in racing? I mean, what are the races you have? And I know everybody wants to win the Kentucky Derby, but are there any other races that is special to Carlos that says, hey, you know, my dad won this one, or my grandfather won that one, or they always wanted to win this one and didn't. I would like to do it for them. Like, are there any races that are on Carlos Martin's radar for any reason?
I think my father being so successful with fillies never got to, I don't think we won in Alabama. I think it's one of the few filly races. He won a lot of good filly races. And I think the Alabama is a race that I would like to set the record straight and win. He had the champion filly that he sold to Peter Grant about 2 months before the Alabama. And Mr. Whiteley had her. Unfortunately, she didn't make it. I think if Dad would have kept her, though, not to say anything, Mr. Whiteley, one of the greatest trainers also, but my father knew the filly well, and I think he would have got Lakeville Miss and she would have won the Alabama that year. I think that's a race that I've always wanted to win. And, all the great filly races, because I always admired my father being such a special trainer with fillies. So the Alabama would be one. And, of course, beating Saratoga, I would like the Travers as well. I'm being greedy here. An Alabama and Travers would be something really special. I don't think either my father or my grandfather won either of those races.
Right. Yeah, no, I could see that. Those would be the ones for me too. If I was ever a trainer, just from growing up in New York and spending all those summers in Saratoga, those are the ones. How many horses do you have now, Carlos?
We have 29 right now, mainly babies. It's kind of a little bit of a reassembling year. We're going through it with the 2-year-olds, but we have some nice ones that we have some high hopes for. Hopefully you'll see them start firing a little bit more in the fall. But I'm optimistic. We have a nice Uncle Mo filly, nice Tapizar colt, a couple of nice unified babies. It's a little diversified group. We have a nice filly for my main client, Mark Hardy. The Uncle Mo is a $700,000 yearling out of Just Whistling Dixie's family, the mother of Mo Heyman, a great broodmare family. So I'm excited about her. Her name is Dreaming of Mo, and some other trials are starting to come on a little bit now.
That's exciting. For sure. And you're patient with your babies. You don't seem to rush them, or if they're ready for Saratoga, that's great. If you got to wait till the fall or a little later in the year, you seem to be okay with that too. So you would you consider yourself patient with the babies?
Pretty patient. I mean, they kind of tell you. It just kind of happens organically. I don't keep a schedule. I tell a lot of the new clients, they see this guy breeds every 7 days, this guy breeds every 5 days, this guy breeds every. There's no schedule with the 2-year-olds. I go by feeling. I go by instinct. I might breeze them this week and get them out of the gate and get them okayed. And then I might breeze them back again from the gate. I might not breeze them for 2 weeks. I might not breeze them for 3 weeks. I might just lick them down the stretch. And everybody's like, why do you breeze this Sunday? I just never been my way. And I just go by the horse, and I go every morning there and every afternoon and see how they're doing. And sometimes I'll get a little more aggressive with them. Sometimes you can see how they're handling the stress of the training. You back off a little bit. It's just all by feel.
That goes back towards the individuality that we were talking about before, that horsemanship, where you kind of get to know each horse and vary what you're doing based on each horse, as opposed to just having a system that they all go through. And the ones that excel in that system or thrive in that system, great. The ones that don't, unfortunately, get sometimes lost in the wayside, so to speak. Now you're also involved, or at least I know your family is involved in a little bit of a bloodstock agency operation. I know Gloria and Greg are involved in buying some babies and scouting some nice horses. Tell me a little bit about that, and if you're involved in that as well.
Well, we're all part of a team. My sister always had the idea that ever since my grandfather had a farm many moons ago, that it would be great to be able to have a one-stop shop where my uncle is back in the business, and they have a beautiful facility they're renting out of Moreston, Florida, called Big Lick Oak Ridge Training Center, a mile track. They're going to put in a turf course there. The owner, Reed Nagel, is really committed to making it a top-class facility. So her idea was to have the Martins break the horses, and then we can all work together with my uncle and just have that synergy that for many years we've always sent horses to different people, and they're all great. We had a great relationship with Ocala Stud. We still do. But they wanted to get involved, and I think it's great. Anytime we can have the family together and we can have the horses that we're going to be training from A to Z from the early stages with my uncle, who's an outstanding horseman, and I think it's a win-win. And they're also will do some commercial pin hooking, so they're definitely involved in the Ocala area. They want to be there for a long time, and they want to be players as consigners and breaking some nice horses, and having racing partnerships in the future as well.
Right. It's exciting, and I think it goes a long way towards in addition to yourself and your training career. It just keeps that Martin legacy in the sport going and actually still growing, because I mean, three generations in and still making a lot of noise in the industry is in my opinion pretty impressive.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
What about the Breeders' Cup this year? Any chance we'll see you there? Is it too early to tell, or do you have a couple on the radar that may step up, or we may have to wait till next year at Santa Anita?
Yeah, I'm dreaming like everybody else that some of these trios you're going to have something really special there, but it's a little bit too early to tell. But definitely keeps you, like they say, that saying, hope springs eternal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now you got to win at Saratoga right at the beginning of the meet. That's always a kind of pressure off kind of thing, I would imagine. You know what I mean? To get that win early, kind of like, okay, got that win. That's that little pressure off, or no?
Oh yeah, no, you've seen a lot of great trainers. We've been doing this a long time, and some of the best trainers in the world come over here and go 0 for or 1 for 80 or 0 for 40. It happens. Tough meet, and if you don't get off to a good start, it's definitely important. And there is something to be said for getting that first win and or not going home with the ducks, proverbial duck, so to speak. It's definitely one of the best meets in the world, if not the premier meet, I think. So yeah, if you win at Saratoga, you're definitely doing well, because a lot of great trainers have gone this meet, without winning.
Yeah, no, it's always been that way. It's been probably the most competitive meet that I can remember, in my life. And I was even talking to somebody the other day, and I'm interested in your take on this. Flavien Prat was really dominating in California, and there's no question he's a super talented rider. I mean, I don't really see any weakness in his riding, but in California, he was dominating, riding a lot of favorites, a lot of small fields. Really, it's just a different game than when you get here. And I said, I'm sure he'll do very, very well. And he's got a lot of, great barns behind him, but I don't think he's going to be able to walk in here and quote, dominate and just, be the guy without really having a, kind of scratch and claw and work his way up. And I think that's kind of how it's playing out. I mean, he's in there and he's a contender, but he's not the dominant guy he was in California. And I think that speaks to the strength of our colony here, and also to the competitiveness of Saratoga.
No question. This is the best colony in the world. I mean, you can go there, and the seventh pick is on a 12-to-1 shot. It's a Hall of Famer. The same way when you're a trainer, you walk into the paddock in a main race and you have 10 horses in the race, and 7 of them are Hall of Famers, and the other 3 are going to be Hall of Famers. I mean, this is the elite here. They don't come to play here.
Right. No, for sure. And it's always been that way. What's your take as a trainer on the new crop rules where they can only, strike 6 times? Is that something as a trainer that you worry about, or you leave that to the riders to just work out on their own? Or do you think
I mean, it's like all these new rules. I mean, there's a big adjustment period. I'm not really sure what to think of it, to be honest. I have mixed emotions. I mean, I think some of this stuff has been thrown at us, and they've been so insane going the other way. I think a little bit over the top in certain instances. I think they should have more horsemen involved in the special new Integrity Act, which I'm all for integrity. It just seems like they just did a lot of this stuff without any kind of group meeting where everybody can have a say on certain things. It just seems like we've been steamrolled a little bit. So I mean, if it's all for the better of the horse and the sport, I'm 100% behind it. I just wish it would have been done a little bit differently, a little bit more thoughtfully in certain aspects, for the horsemen and stuff like that. I just think that it's, like I said, the protection of the horses is a #1 priority. But certain things, it seems like they really went really far left. I'd like to maybe see if some of these things might have to be adjusted. I guess time will tell.
Right.
But I'm gonna keep faith that and be I'm a eternal optimist. So we'll just see.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at it very similarly to you. Hoping it works out for the best, hoping that what needs to be tweaked gets tweaked, and all for the better of the horses. You're not really a guy that ships a lot. You're pretty much in New York unless you go out of town for a stake, or to the Breeders' Cup like a couple of years ago or something like that, or a big stake somewhere. But I would have to guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are in favor of uniformity as far as the drug rules go, and the procedures and things like that, so there's no confusion from one jurisdiction to another, what's allowed in Kentucky, what's allowed in California, what's allowed here. I mean, that's got to be a positive, no?
Yeah, no question. I mean, there was just an example the other day that I couldn't believe. There's an old-time trainer from Indiana, Marvin Johnson, been training for many, many years, and they said his vet gave the horse ACTH. He said they didn't. Next thing you know, he's being thrown off the grounds like a criminal, and it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, obviously they shouldn't be giving the horse race day medication, which is nonsense. ACTH, I guess, used to calm a horse down or whatever. You know, it's not like they're hardcore giving the horse meth or anything like that, but it just was some places, like you said, these guys get 16 positives a year and they're laughing and winning grade ones. And then this poor guy probably, I don't know his record. I may be speaking out of turn, but it just seems like it could go, if you're in the wrong state, it could go south quickly. And for something that might be, not, everything's a big deal, but you know what I'm saying, in the context of what we see that's gone on,
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to say publicly names, but I mean, there's some of the top trainers in the world, Hall of Fame, caliber, and some of them have a rap sheet a mile long. It's just the way
Right.
it is. I mean, there might've been a lot of technicalities involved, and then you get a guy like this, I mean, and he's getting handcuffed and thrown out and ruled off. I mean, it just seems like the uniformity rules would be the number one thing that has to be put in place.
I agree. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I want to get your take on one last thing, because we go back to a different era, and there's something that I always observe, and no one's ever really able to answer this question for me. Okay, and I've asked a lot of people, and I get a lot of different answers, but no one's ever given me an answer. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can get my teeth into that and go with it. Okay, Lasix has been very controversial in our sport. Okay, I understand what it does, what it's used for, and how it helps horses, but I think back to when we were kids growing up around the races. Okay, Lasix was not allowed in New York. Okay? Our horses ran longer, they had longer careers, they were more durable, and when you had a horse that had to run on Lasix, okay, you had to ship him to the Meadowlands or Maryland, and he was kind of considered a second stringer, was never going to be a champion. And we never had a problem with horses coming back bleeding from the nostrils or anything like that, or these horror shows that people are saying, oh, if we take them all off Lasix, that's what you're going to have. I mean, our horses didn't need Lasix in New York, they just didn't. Now, almost every horse, until they started tweaking the rules, almost, you go back 2 years, every horse was running on Lasix, whether they were, I'm assuming, whether they were bleeding or not, because they all weren't bleeders, at least back then. What happened to the breed, to the sport? I mean, what changed where all of a sudden, or over time, maybe every horse needs Lasix, or else it's going to be a catastrophe?
Yeah, I mean, you make excellent points as far as racing and the stables that bred horses to race, and now it's more commercialized, and the genetics, and so many studs out there, and everybody just breeding anything to anything, and everything's a stallion, every mare has to be bred. So maybe some of the genetics have weakened the breed a little bit in the way that people approach and raise a horse, as opposed to a sale and a race horse. There could be something to it of that effect. It's hard to say, but you're right. I mean, it's like, something that you would never have thought it back, when we were growing up, that you need to have a medication, to run a horse, like that. And some people, but you have seen some certain horses and they really moved up on it, and, a bad bleeder, but most of the time we just, like you said, gave them time. It was a stress situation, and the horse just need to just go to the farm and relax and just take a little bit of a breather, and, or put on some special medication, and they would find the reason why, could be any kind of infection causing the immune system. And so there's a lot of more thought process. Now everything, you just throw them on this, throw them on that. And I'm guilty of it. Like a lot of trainers, you have the vets there, and, you follow a lot of their leads and stuff. And that's something that also, has to change eventually. You have to get back to that horsemanship, and maybe all this stuff will, in some manner, shape, and form, make things a little bit more thoughtful of a process, which is, I guess, a good thing.
Right, which is kind of like what we spoke about in the beginning, that old school horsemanship. Like when I think back to trainers like your father and your grandfather, they didn't need Lasix. You know what I mean? They didn't have any horses on Lasix. One horse in the farm, maybe.
Like my good friend who passed away, Brian Morgan, his grandfather, old school trainer, Red Charles, used to say when he had that champion, turn back the alarm. Give me a fast grade bitch that can go a half and 46 in an ice tub. That's the way they thought, those guys.
Right.
They train their horses well, and they worked on them and they ran them. And they ran them.
Right.
My father, I think, ran Wayward last 13 times when she was a champion filly in 81. Now, I guess most of the top trainers, if you run more than 6 or 7 times, you might get a notification that you might get a breeze that you're doing the wrong thing by the animals, politically incorrect. Yeah, a lot of things have changed.
All right, no, for sure. Hey, Carlos, I won't take any more of your time. I think it was great to catch up with you a little bit. I think you got a great career going. I think the bloodstock thing is great. I'm really glad to see the whole Martin legacy continuing. We got to get a race named for your grandfather. I think it's
I agree.
long overdue, and I think you're the guy to do it. Go in Dave's office, say, Dave, not for nothing, make this happen.
Yes, I appreciate the consideration and the kind words and the encouragement. So we're going to keep pushing forward, and we're going to get a graded stake race named after Frank Martin. You're right; he deserves it.
Absolutely, man. It's long overdue and well deserved. Nobody can argue that. So I'll stop the recording. We'll say goodbye real quick off camera, and I'll let you go. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right.
Take care.
Nobody does it better.